The thunder cracked like gunfire across Chicago's skyline, sending Isabella Romano scrambling to secure the loose awning outside her bookstore. Rain lashed against the windows of Pages and Dreams, turning the quiet street of Little Italy into a river of chaos. She should have closed an hour ago, but Mrs. Chen needed that cookbook for her grandson's birthday, and old Mr. Benedetti was still browsing the mystery section like he did every Thursday evening. Lightning illuminated the narrow alley behind her store, casting twisted shadows that made her pulse quicken. 3 years of running this place alone had taught her to trust her instincts, and tonight something felt different. Wrong. The bell above her door chimed violently as someone stumbled inside, bringing a gust of wind and rain that scattered the carefully arranged bookmarks on her counter. Isabella spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the baseball bat she kept beneath the register. The man who stood dripping in her doorway wasn't what she expected. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore an expensive suit that was now soaked through, clinging to his frame. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and when he looked up, she found herself staring into eyes the color of steel in winter. But it wasn't his striking appearance that made her breath catch. It was the blood seeping through his white shirt, dark stains spreading across the fabric like spilled ink. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with pain, but carrying an authority that seemed to fill the small space. "I just need—" His knees buckled. Isabella moved without thinking, dropping her defensive stance to catch his arm as he swayed. The moment her fingers touched his jacket, she felt the tremor running through his powerful frame. This wasn't just exhaustion. This was a man fighting to stay conscious. "Jesus, you're hurt," she breathed, her practical nature overriding her fear. "What happened to you?" His laugh was bitter, tinged with something that sounded like disbelief. "Wrong place, wrong time. Story of my life." "Can you make it to the back room?" Isabella asked, already guiding him through the maze of bookshelves toward the small office behind the counter. Her father's old leather chair still sat there, worn but sturdy. "I have a first aid kit." The stranger allowed her to help him, though she could feel the tension in his muscles as if accepting assistance was foreign to him. When they reached the chair, he sank into it with a barely suppressed groan, his hand pressed firmly against his ribs. "You should call the police," he said, watching her face carefully. Isabella paused, her hand halfway to the first aid kit on the shelf. Something in his tone suggested that calling the police would be the last thing he wanted. She studied his face, noting the sharp cut of his jawline, the way his eyes seemed to catalog every exit, every potential threat. This wasn't a man who trusted easily. "Should I?" she asked quietly. Their eyes met, and for a moment the only sound was the rain hammering against the windows and the soft tick of the antique clock on her desk. He was measuring her, she realized, deciding whether she could be trusted with whatever truth he carried. "No," he said finally. "Please." Isabella had always been too curious for her own good. It's what had gotten her father into trouble, that relentless need to dig deeper, to uncover what others preferred to keep buried. But looking at this wounded stranger, she found herself nodding. "Let me see how bad it is," she said, reaching for the kit. As she cleaned the wound, she learned he'd been grazed by something sharp, maybe a knife. The cut was deep enough to bleed profusely, but not life-threatening. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. 3 years of caring for her teenage brother Marco had taught her basic first aid. "You're good at this," the man observed, wincing as she applied antiseptic. "Practice," Isabella replied simply. "I have a brother who thinks he's invincible." "How old?" 17. Old enough to make terrible decisions, young enough to think he knows everything. She glanced up at him. "What's your excuse?" A smile ghosted across his lips, transforming his severe features. 32. Old enough to know better, stupid enough to do it anyway. As she bandaged his ribs, Isabella found herself stealing glances at his hands. Long fingers, but scarred knuckles that spoke of violence. A tattoo peeked out from beneath his sleeve, intricate designs that seemed to tell a story she couldn't read. Everything about him screamed danger, yet his voice when he'd asked her not to call the police had held a vulnerability that tugged at something deep in her chest. "There," she said, securing the bandage. "That should hold until you can see a real doctor." He started to stand, then stopped, his hand moving to his jacket pocket. "I need to pay you for this." "Don't be ridiculous." Anyone would have. "No." His voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. "They wouldn't." He pulled out a roll of bills that made Isabella's eyes widen. Without counting, he peeled off several hundreds and placed them on her desk. Then, his fingers found something else in his pocket. A watch, silver and elegant, with an inscription she couldn't quite read in the dim light. "Take this too," he said, setting it beside the money. "As collateral." Collateral for what? He was already moving toward the door, his steps more steady now but still careful. "For your kindness. I'll be back for it." "Wait," Isabella called, but he was already pushing through the door into the storm. She rushed to the window, pressing her face against the rain-streaked glass, but the stranger had vanished into the night as suddenly as he'd appeared. Only the money and the watch remained as proof he'd been there at all. Isabella picked up the timepiece with trembling fingers, turning it over to read the inscription. Her blood went cold. "D. Salvatore, honor above all." The Salvatore name was whispered in Little Italy the way people spoke of ghosts or demons. Everyone knew the stories, passed down through generations of Italian families who remembered when the neighborhood belonged to men who settled disputes with bullets instead of lawyers. Isabella sank into her father's chair, the watch heavy in her palm. Judge Anthony Romano had spent his final years fighting men like this, dedicating his life to bringing organized crime to justice. He'd died for it, in a car accident that had never felt quite right to her. And now one of them had bled in her bookstore, had looked at her with eyes that held secrets darker than the storm outside. Thunder rolled overhead as she locked the front door, her hands shaking as she turned the deadbolt. The money sat on her desk like an accusation, more than she made in a month. The watch ticked steadily, counting down to a return she both dreaded and, God help her, anticipated. Because despite everything her rational mind screamed, despite the legacy of her father's crusade against corruption, she found herself wondering about the wounded stranger with winter eyes who had stumbled into her sanctuary. Who was Dante Salvatore, and why couldn't she stop thinking about the way his voice had broken when he'd asked her not to call the police? Outside, the storm raged on, but Isabella knew the real tempest was just beginning. 3 days passed without a word from the mysterious stranger, but the watch on Isabella's nightstand ticked like a countdown to something inevitable. She found herself checking the inscription obsessively, running her thumb over the engraved letters, as if they might reveal their secrets through touch alone. D. Salvatore, honor above. All the irony wasn't lost on her. Honor from a family built on violence and corruption. Isabella had spent those 3 sleepless nights researching everything she could find about the Salvatores. Newspaper clippings from her father's files, old court records, whispered neighborhood gossip transformed into cold facts. The picture that emerged made her stomach churn. The Salvatore family had ruled Chicago's underworld for 3 generations. Dante's grandfather, Enzo, had built the empire during Prohibition. His father, Roberto, had expanded it into construction and waste management. And now, according to the most recent articles, leadership had fallen to the sons after Roberto's death 2 years ago. 2 sons, Dante and his older brother Luca. But the trail went cold there. No recent photos, no current addresses, nothing that told her who the man bleeding in her bookstore really was. The bell above her door chimed, jerking her from her research. Isabella quickly shoved the newspaper clippings beneath the counter, her heart hammering as she looked up. But it wasn't Dante Salvatore standing in her doorway. A woman in her 50s entered, elegant in the way that spoke of old money and careful breeding. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, her designer coat untouched by the morning drizzle. "Ms. Romano?" The woman's voice carried a slight Italian accent, softened by decades in America. "I'm Maria Benedetti. I believe you know my husband, Giuseppe." Isabella relaxed slightly. Mr. Benedetti was one of her most loyal customers, a gentleman who bought mysteries and always paid in exact change. "Of course, how can I help you?" Maria's eyes swept the bookstore with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating territory. Giuseppe speaks very highly of this place. He says it reminds him of the old neighborhood, before. She paused, her expression hardening. Before certain elements changed things. Something in her tone made Isabella's pulse quicken. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand. My dear, your father was Judge Romano, yes? At Isabella's nod, Maria continued. He was a good man, a brave man. Giuseppe always said he was one of the few who stood up to the families when others looked the other way. Isabella's throat tightened. My father believed in justice. Yes, he did. Maria stepped closer, lowering her voice. Which is why I must ask you to be careful, cara mia. There are whispers in the neighborhood. People have seen unusual visitors to your shop. Before Isabella could respond, the bell chimed again. This time, her breath caught. Dante Salvatore stood in the doorway, his presence immediately transforming the atmosphere. He wore a different suit today, charcoal gray, that fit his frame perfectly. The bandage was gone, though Isabella could see the careful way he held himself, protecting his still-healing ribs. His eyes found hers first, a flash of something warm and unguarded passing between them, before his gaze shifted to Maria. The change was instantaneous. His expression became a mask of polite indifference, but Isabella caught the subtle tension in his shoulders. Mrs. Benedetti, he said, inclining his head slightly. How is Giuseppe? Maria's face went pale. Mr. Salvatore, I was just leaving. She moved toward the door with dignified haste, but paused beside Isabella. Remember what I said, dear. Some visitors bring more than they take. The door closed behind her with a soft chime, leaving Isabella alone with the man whose watch had haunted her dreams. Friend of yours? Dante asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Customer's wife, Isabella replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She was warning me about you. His laugh was rueful. Smart woman, you should listen to her. Then why are you here? Dante moved deeper into the store, his fingers trailing along the spines of books as he walked. My watch, he said simply. I told you I'd be back for it. Isabella reached beneath the counter, her hand trembling slightly as she produced the timepiece. Here. But when she held it out, he didn't immediately take it. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that made her think of winter nights and dangerous promises. You researched me, he said. Not a question, but a statement. Isabella's cheeks flushed. I research everyone who bleeds in my bookstore. And what did you find? She met his gaze directly, drawing on the courage her father had always praised her for. Enough to know I should be terrified of you. Are you? His voice was soft, almost hopeful. Terrified? The honest answer would have been yes, but not for the reasons he probably expected. She was terrified of the way her pulse jumped when he looked at her, terrified of how his smile seemed to chase away the shadows that had lived in her chest since her father's death. I should be, she whispered. Dante's hand covered hers as she held out the watch, his fingers warm against her skin. But you're not. Before she could answer, the sound of books crashing to the floor made them both spin around. Marco Romano stood among the scattered novels, his 17-year-old face flushed with anger and accusation. What the hell is going on here, Bella? Isabella jerked her hand free from Dante's, her protective instincts flaring. Marco, what are you doing here? You should be in school. Got suspended, Marco said, his eyes never leaving Dante. And I come home to find my sister cozying up to some wise guy in an expensive suit. The air in the small bookstore suddenly felt charged with tension. Dante straightened to his full height, and for the first time since she'd met him, Isabella saw a glimpse of the man the newspapers wrote about. Dangerous, unforgiving, powerful. You're Isabella's brother, Dante said, his voice carefully neutral. And you're Salvatore, Marco shot back, surprising both adults with his recognition. Yeah, I know who you are. The whole neighborhood's talking about how you've been sniffing around here. Marco, Isabella warned, but her brother ignored her. My father died fighting scum like you, Marco continued, his young voice shaking with rage. And now you're here, what, trying to corrupt his daughter too? The words hit their target. Dante's jaw tightened, and something flickered in his eyes that looked almost like pain. He took a step back, creating distance between himself and Isabella. "Your brother's right," he said quietly, his gaze returning to her face. "Your father was a good man. He would have wanted better for you than this." "Don't you dare," Isabella said, her own anger finally sparking. "Don't you dare come in here and make decisions about what my father would have wanted. You didn't know him." "No," Dante agreed, pocketing his watch without looking at it. "But I know what I am. And Mrs. Benedetti was right. Some visitors bring more than they take." He moved toward the door, but Isabella's voice stopped him. "What if I don't care what you bring?" Dante paused, his hand on the door handle. When he looked back, his expression was unreadable. "Then you're more dangerous than I thought." He left without another word, the bell's chime sounding almost mournful in his wake. Marco began picking up the scattered books, his movements aggressive. "Jesus, Bella, what were you thinking? Dad's barely been dead 3 years and you're already what?" Isabella snapped, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. "Forgetting everything he stood for." The accusation hit her like a physical blow. Isabella sank into the chair behind the counter, suddenly exhausted. Marco was right, of course. Her father had dedicated his life to fighting corruption, had died because he refused to look the other way when powerful men broke the law. But Dante Salvatore didn't feel like the monster from the newspaper clippings. When he'd looked at her, really looked at her, she'd seen something she recognized, the same bone-deep weariness she carried, the weight of responsibilities that felt too heavy for one person to bear. "I haven't forgotten anything," she said finally. "But maybe Dad's fight doesn't have to be mine." Marco dropped the books he was holding, staring at her with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "He was our father, Bella. They killed him. It was a car accident." "Bullshit." Marco's voice cracked. "You know it wasn't an accident, just like Mom's cancer wasn't really cancer. They destroy everything good in this neighborhood, and now one of them is in our bookstore, and you're just going to let him?" Isabella had no answer for the pain in her brother's voice, no way to explain that when Dante had touched her hand, she'd felt something she thought had died with their parents. Hope, maybe. Or just the possibility that not everything in their world was as black and white as her father had believed. That night, long after Marco had gone to bed, Isabella stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the rain-slicked streets of Little Italy. Somewhere out there, Dante Salvatore was living his life in the shadows her father had spent years trying to illuminate. She pressed her palm against the glass, wondering if she was betraying everything she'd been raised to believe, or if sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was refuse to let someone surprise you. Isabella arrived at her bookstore Monday morning to find her front window shattered into a spider web of cracks held together by rain and spite. Glass crunched under her feet as she pushed through the door, her breath catching at the destruction that greeted her inside. Books lay scattered across the floor like broken birds, their pages torn and trampled. The antique cash register her father had bought at auction lay on its side, coins spilled across the hardwood like silver tears. But it was the message spray-painted across her father's favorite bookshelf that made her knees buckle. "Keep your mouth shut or join your father." "Jesus Christ," she whispered, her hands trembling as she surveyed the damage. Whoever had done this had been thorough, methodical. They'd known exactly which books were first editions, which shelves held her most treasured stock. This wasn't random vandalism. This was a warning written in destruction and fear. Isabella's phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it, sinking to her knees among the scattered pages. She picked up a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that her father had given her for her 16th birthday, its spine now cracked beyond repair. The door chime sounded behind her, but she didn't look up. "We're closed," she said, her voice hollow. "I can see that." Dante Salvatore's voice cut through her despair like a blade. Isabella's head snapped up to find him standing in the doorway, taking in the devastation with eyes that had gone Arctic cold. His expensive suit seemed out of place among the wreckage, but his expression belonged to a different world entirely. A world where people who destroyed bookstores faced consequences that didn't involve lawyers or insurance claims. "Who did this?" His voice carried an authority that made her spine straighten despite everything. I don't know. Isabella pushed herself to her feet, brushing dust from her jeans. I found it like this when I opened. Dante stepped carefully through the debris, his movements predatory as he examined the damage. When his eyes found the spray-painted threat, something shifted in his posture. The air around him seemed to thicken with barely controlled violence. This is about me, he said, his voice flat with certainty. They're sending you a message because of me. Isabella hugged her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm morning. What kind of message? The kind that gets people killed if they don't listen. Dante turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression she hadn't expected. Guilt. I should never have come here. I put you in danger the moment I walked through that door. You were bleeding, Isabella protested. I couldn't just... Yes, you could have. His interruption was sharp but not unkind. Most people would have. Most people do. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps on broken glass made them both turn. Two men entered through the destroyed doorway, their leather jackets and hard faces marking them as clearly as uniforms. Isabella instinctively stepped closer to Dante, who moved smoothly between her and the newcomers. Boss, the taller of the two men said, nodding respectfully to Dante. We got word about the trouble. How fast can you get a cleanup crew here, Tommy? Dante asked without taking his eyes off Isabella. Hour, maybe two. But boss, this looks like Torino work. The signature's all over it. Isabella saw Dante's jaw clench at the name. Vince? Who else? Word is he's been sniffing around the neighborhood, asking questions about your activities. The weight of what she'd stumbled into began to settle on Isabella's shoulders like lead. These weren't just random criminals. They were part of something larger, more organized, more dangerous than she'd imagined. And somehow, by showing kindness to a wounded stranger, she'd made herself a target. I need to call my insurance company, she said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. No. Dante's response was immediate. Insurance companies ask questions. Questions lead to investigations. Investigations put more people at risk. Then how am I supposed to fix this? Isabella gestured helplessly at the destruction surrounding them. Dante exchanged a look with his men, some silent communication passing between them. The shorter one, who hadn't spoken yet, nodded and pulled out his phone, moving toward the back of the store. Leave that to me, Dante said. Tommy, I want you to put a detail on this place, round the clock. Nothing happens here without my knowing about it. You got it, boss. Isabella's temper finally sparked through her shock. Wait just a minute. You can't just take over my life because someone trashed my store. Dante's attention returned to her with laser focus. They didn't trash your store, Isabella. They sent you a death threat. There's a difference. The casual way he said it, as if death threats were as common as weather reports, made her stomach lurch. This is insane. 3 days ago, I was worried about paying rent and keeping Marco in school. Now I'm standing in the ruins of my father's dream, talking about death threats and protection details. 3 days ago, you chose to help a stranger instead of calling the police, Dante countered. Actions have consequences in my world. I'm not in your world. Yes, you are. His voice was gentle but implacable. The moment you opened that door, you stepped into it. The only question now is whether you survive it. Isabella sank into the one chair that remained upright, overwhelmed by the scope of what she'd unleashed. What do they want from me? Dante knelt beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. This close, she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could smell that expensive cologne that had haunted her dreams. They want you to be afraid, he said softly. They want you to close this place, sell it to one of their front companies for pennies on the dollar, and disappear. Your father's bookstore becomes another money laundering operation, and the neighborhood loses another piece of its soul. And if I refuse? His expression grew grim. Then they escalate until you don't have a choice. The phone in the back of the store stopped ringing. The shorter man returned, his expression troubled. Boss, we got a problem. Word is Torino's people grabbed the Romano kid from school about an hour ago. The world tilted sideways, Isabella shot to her feet, grabbing Dante's jacket with desperate hands. Marco? They took Marco? Where? Dante's voice cut like ice. Unknown. But there's been chatter about a meet tonight. Warehouse district. Isabella couldn't breathe. Her vision tunneled, and for a moment she thought she might faint. Marco, her baby brother, in the hands of men who destroyed bookstores and left death threats. Men who had probably killed their father. I have to call the police, she gasped. No. Dante caught her hands, his grip firm but gentle. Police involvement gets your brother killed. These people don't negotiate with badges. Then what do I do? Tears she'd been holding back since she'd walked into the destroyed store finally spilled over. He's all I have left. Dante's thumbs brushed away her tears with surprising tenderness. You let me handle it. Why? The question came out as a broken whisper. Why would you risk your men, your life, for us? Something shifted in Dante's expression, a crack in the armor he wore so effortlessly. Because 3 days ago, a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands saved my life without asking for anything in return. Because she looked at me and saw something worth saving. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And because Vincent Torino killed more than your father, Isabella. He killed my brother, too. The revelation hit her like lightning. Your brother? Luca, 2 years ago. He was trying to get out of the family business, wanted to go legitimate. Torino saw weakness and exploited it. Dante's voice carried an old pain, carefully controlled but never forgotten. Your father was building a case that would have put Vincent away for life. My brother was going to testify. Isabella's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Dante hadn't caught her, his arms strong and sure around her trembling frame. They killed them both to protect themselves, he continued, his breath warm against her hair. And now they're coming for you because they think I care about you. She pulled back to look at him, seeing past the dangerous reputation to the man underneath. Do you? Care about me? His answer was a long time coming, as if he were weighing the consequences of honesty against the safety of lies. More than I should, he said finally. More than is safe for either of us. Before Isabella could respond, Tommy cleared his throat. Boss, we need to move if we're going to get the kid back. Dante straightened, and Isabella watched as he transformed before her eyes. The gentleman who had wiped away her tears disappeared, replaced by the dangerous leader of a criminal empire. But this time, instead of terrifying her, it comforted her. Because that dangerous man was about to risk everything to save her brother. Isabella, his voice commanded her attention. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Looking into his storm-gray eyes, thinking about Marco scared and alone somewhere in the city, Isabella made the choice that would change everything. Yes, she whispered. I trust you. The ride to Dante's compound passed in a blur of Chicago streets and Isabella's racing thoughts. She sat in the passenger seat of his black sedan, watching the familiar neighborhoods of her childhood give way to industrial warehouses and empty lots. Tommy drove while Dante made calls in rapid Italian, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. How long do we have? Isabella asked during a brief lull in his conversations. Until midnight, Dante replied, checking his watch. Torino wants to make this theatrical. He's old school that way. Isabella's stomach twisted. And if we can't get to him by then? Dante's silence was answer enough. The compound sat behind high walls topped with razor wire, but as they passed through the gates, Isabella was surprised by what lay beyond. Instead of the fortress she'd expected, she found herself looking at a restored mansion from the 1920s, its limestone facade and manicured gardens speaking of old money and established power. Your home? She asked. My prison, Dante corrected, his voice carrying a bitterness that caught her off guard. My grandfather built this place to show the neighborhood that the Salvatoris had arrived. My father expanded it to prove we belonged. Now it's mine, and all I can think about is how many good men died to pay for the marble in the foyer. He led her through rooms that belonged in a museum, Persian rugs worth more than her annual income, oil paintings that probably had provenance papers, furniture that screamed understated elegance. But Isabella noticed the details that spoke to the building's true purpose. Bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, security cameras disguised as decorative elements. They ended up in what Dante called his office, though it looked more like a library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that showed the wear of actual reading. Isabella couldn't help herself. She moved toward the shelves, her fingers trailing along familiar spines. "You read Dickens?" she observed, pulling out a well-thumbed copy of Great Expectations. "My brother's influence," Dante said, moving to a wall safe hidden behind a false bookshelf. "Luca believed that if we were going to inherit a criminal empire, we should at least be educated criminals." Isabella opened the book, finding margin notes in two different handwritings. One neat and careful, the other bold and sprawling. "Which notes are yours?" "The messy ones." Dante's smile was sad as he worked the safe's combination. "Luca always said I had the handwriting of a barbarian." "What did he think of your career choice?" Dante's hand stilled on the safe dial. "He hated it. Hated what our father had built. Hated what it turned people into. He spent the last 5 years of his life trying to convince me we could go legitimate, that we could use our money and connections to build something clean. But you didn't believe him. I wanted to." He pulled a thick manila folder from the safe, setting it on his desk with reverent care. "But men like Vincent Torino don't let people just walk away. They see weakness in mercy, opportunity, and honor." Isabella approached the desk, drawn by the careful way Dante handled the folder. "What is that?" "Your father's life work," he said simply. "Everything he compiled about the Torino organization. Bank records, witness statements, surveillance photos. Luca stole it from the evidence room after your father's death, before it could disappear forever." Her breath caught. "You've had this for 3 years?" "Luca had it. When he died, it came to me." Dante opened the folder, revealing neat handwriting she recognized as her father's judicial script. "I've been trying to figure out what to do with it ever since." Isabella sank into the chair across from his desk, staring at pages of her father's meticulous documentation. Bank transfers, shell companies, property deeds, all the financial threads that connected legitimate businesses to blood money. "Why didn't you use it?" she whispered. "You could have destroyed Torino years ago." "Because using it would have meant admitting my brother was working with the FBI. It would have meant painting a target on everyone who helped him." Dante's voice was heavy with old pain. "I chose protecting the living over honoring the dead." Isabella turned a page and found herself staring at surveillance photos of men she recognized from neighborhood gatherings, church functions, community meetings. Respectable faces hiding criminal hearts. "My God," she breathed. "He documented everything. Your father was thorough, probably too thorough for his own good." Dante closed the folder gently. "Torino found out about the investigation 3 days before your father's car went off the road." The words hit her like physical blows. "You're saying he was murdered." "I'm saying your father was too good a driver to lose control on a clear night on a straight road." Dante's eyes met hers. "And the brake lines don't cut themselves." Isabella's world tilted. She'd suspected, had wondered during the long nights after the funeral, but hearing it confirmed by someone who'd lived in that shadow world made it real in a way that gut instinct never could. The official investigation? Buried. Key evidence lost. Witnesses developed sudden memory problems. Dante's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd seen too much corruption to be surprised by it anymore. "Your father died because he believed the system could be fixed from within. My brother died because he believed it could be fixed by good men working together." Isabella wiped tears she didn't realize had started falling. "And you? What do you believe?" Before Dante could answer, Tommy burst through the office doors without knocking. "Boss, we got movement. Torino's people are heading to the old Pier 47 warehouse. They've got the kid." Dante was on his feet instantly, the grieving brother replaced by the decisive leader. "How many?" "At least a dozen, maybe more. They're not trying to hide it. Because they want us to come," Dante said grimly. He turned to Isabella, his expression softening slightly. "I need you to stay here. My men will keep you safe while we— No. Isabella stood, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Marco is my brother, my responsibility. This isn't a negotiation, Isabella. Where we're going, people die. Good people, bad people. It doesn't matter once the shooting starts. Then don't let it start. She moved around the desk, placing herself directly in front of him. You said Torino killed our family members to protect his secrets. What if we didn't give him secrets to protect? Dante frowned. What are you talking about? Isabella picked up her father's folder, holding it like a weapon. What if we made everything public? Every bank record, every shell company, every dirty transaction my father documented. If it's all out in the open, there's no reason to kill anyone to keep it quiet. The FBI tried that approach with my brother. It got him killed. Because he was trying to work within the system, Isabella countered, her mind racing. But what if we went around it entirely? What if we gave this to every news outlet in Chicago simultaneously, make it impossible to bury? Tommy looked between them like he was watching a tennis match he didn't understand. Boss, we need to move. The meet's in 2 hours. Dante studied Isabella's face, and she could see him weighing options, calculating risks. Even if your plan worked, even if we brought down Torino's entire operation, your brother would still be dead. Vincent doesn't leave loose ends. Then we give him something more valuable than revenge. Isabella's voice gained strength as the plan took shape in her mind. We give him a way out. Witness protection, new identity, a chance to disappear before the story breaks. You're talking about negotiating with a man who's already decided to kill your brother. I'm talking about offering him something he wants more than Marco's death. Isabella looked directly into Dante's storm-gray eyes. Freedom. And the only thing standing between Vincent Torino and a federal prison cell is this folder. Dante was quiet for a long moment, and Isabella could almost see him running scenarios, weighing probabilities. Finally, he nodded to Tommy. Get me a meeting. Tell Torino I want to discuss terms. Boss, this is crazy. We should just hit them hard and fast, get the kid out. And lose how many men in the process? Dante's voice carried the weight of command. Sometimes the smart play isn't the obvious one. As Tommy left to make arrangements, Dante turned back to Isabella. If this goes wrong, if Torino decides to kill us both instead of dealing, I want you to know something. What? 3 days ago, when I stumbled into your bookstore, I was ready to die. I'd been running my father's empire for 2 years, and every day I felt a little more of my soul disappear. Then you looked at me with those kind eyes and saw something worth saving. His hand cupped her cheek with infinite gentleness. You gave me a reason to want to live again. Isabella's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. Dante, I know we've only known each other for days. I know this is insane. But somewhere between that first cup of coffee and this moment, I fell in love with you. Isabella Romano. Before she could respond, he kissed her. Not the desperate, passionate kiss she might have expected, but something softer, more profound. A kiss that tasted like promises and possibility, like hope in the face of impossible odds. When they broke apart, Isabella rested her forehead against his. Let's go get my brother back. The warehouse district at night resembled a graveyard of Chicago's industrial past. Broken windows stared down from abandoned buildings like hollow eyes, and the air carried the smell of rust, diesel, and something else. Fear. Isabella sat in the passenger seat of Dante's sedan, her father's folder clutched against her chest like armor. Second thoughts? Dante asked, his voice carefully neutral as they approached Pier 47. Every single one, Isabella admitted. But Marco doesn't have the luxury of my doubts. The warehouse loomed ahead, a concrete monolith against the dark sky. Floodlights illuminated the loading dock where several black SUVs sat like predatory animals. Men in expensive suits moved in and out of the shadows, their casual postures belying the weapons Isabella was certain they carried. Remember, Dante said, parking 50 yards from the entrance. Let me do the talking. Vincent Torino has been playing this game since before you were born. He'll try to rattle you, to make you emotional. Don't let him. Isabella nodded, though her hands trembled as she smoothed down her jacket. She'd changed into her most professional outfit, a navy blazer her father had bought her for law school interviews she'd never attended. Somehow, wearing it made her feel closer to the man who'd raised her to believe in justice over vengeance. Tommy and 3 other men flanked them as they walked toward the warehouse entrance. The Torino soldiers tensed as they approached, hands drifting toward concealed weapons, but no one drew. Yet, the inside of the warehouse had been transformed into a makeshift conference room. A folding table sat in the center of the vast space, surrounded by metal chairs that looked like they'd been stolen from a church basement. Portable lights cast harsh shadows, creating pockets of darkness where armed men waited. Vincent Torino sat at the far end of the table like a king holding court. Isabella's first thought was that he looked nothing like she'd expected. Where the newspaper photos had shown a broad-shouldered man with cold eyes, the reality was more subtle and somehow more frightening. Torino was elegant in the way of old-world aristocracy, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit immaculate despite the industrial setting. But his eyes, when they settled on Isabella, held the kind of calculating intelligence that had built empires on other people's graves. "Miss Romano," he said, rising from his chair with old-fashioned courtesy, "you look remarkably like your father. He was a handsome man, Judge Romano. Principled, too, sometimes fatally so." The casual reference to her father's murder made Isabella's vision blur with rage, but Dante's steadying hand on her arm kept her grounded. "Mr. Torino," Dante said, his voice carrying the formal respect due an elder in their twisted world. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Curiosity, mostly," Torino replied, settling back into his chair. When Dante Salvatore asks for a sit-down instead of declaring war, a man pays attention, though I confess, I'm surprised you brought the girl. "The girl has a name," Isabella said, finding her voice despite the fear clawing at her throat. "And she has something you want." Torino's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, I doubt that very much. What could a bookstore owner possibly have that interests me?" Isabella set her father's folder on the table between them. 3 years of your life, bank records, shell companies, witness statements, surveillance photos. Everything my father compiled before you had him killed. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. Torino's smile faded, replaced by something infinitely more dangerous. "Careful, little girl. Accusations like that have consequences." "So does evidence," Isabella shot back, "especially when it's photocopied and sitting in safe deposit boxes at 6 different banks, with instructions to release everything to the press if anything happens to me or my family." It was a bluff, but delivered with enough conviction that she saw uncertainty flicker in Torino's eyes. "Where's my brother?" she demanded. Torino gestured lazily toward the shadows. 2 men emerged, dragging Marco between them. Isabella's heart clenched at the sight of her little brother, his face bruised, his school uniform torn and dirty. But his eyes, when they met hers, burned with the same fierce Romano pride that had gotten their father killed. "Marco," she whispered. "I'm okay, Bella," he said, though his voice shook slightly. "Don't give these bastards anything." One of Torino's men backhanded Marco casually, the sound echoing through the warehouse. Isabella started forward, but Dante caught her arm, holding her back with iron strength. "Now then," Torino said, as if nothing had happened, "let's discuss terms. You give me that folder and any copies, and I let you all walk out of here. Simple business transaction." "A counteroffer," Dante said, his voice deadly calm. "You let the boy go, and we don't flood every newspaper and television station in Chicago with enough evidence to put you away for 3 lifetimes. Torino laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "You think I'm afraid of newspapers? I've been buying journalists longer than you've been breathing, Salvatore." "Times change," Isabella said, pulling out her phone. "These days information travels faster than money. 1 button, and this entire folder uploads to a dozen different news outlets simultaneously. Cloud storage is a wonderful thing." Another bluff, but Torino's expression tightened slightly. "Even if that were true," he said carefully, "dead women don't press buttons." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Isabella felt the weight of armed men in the shadows, knew that she and Dante were outnumbered at least 3-1, but she also saw something else in Torino's posture. The careful calculation of a man who'd survived decades in a world where 1 mistake meant death. "Kill us, and the story runs anyway," she said. I've got a dead man's switch set up. If I don't check in every 6 hours, everything goes public automatically. Clever, Torino admitted, but you're forgetting something important. What's that? His smile returned, cold as winter. I don't need to kill you to destroy you. Your little brother there, for instance. Terrible things happen to pretty boys in prison, and I have friends in every correctional facility in Illinois. Isabella's blood turned to ice. He hasn't done anything. Drugs are so easy to plant. A few kilos of heroin in his school locker, an anonymous tip to the police. He'd be looking at 20 to life as an adult. Such a waste. You sick bastard, Marco spat, earning another blow that split his lip. Isabella felt her carefully constructed plan crumbling. Torino had found her weakness, the one threat she couldn't counter with evidence or publicity. He could destroy Marco's life without laying a finger on him, could twist the legal system her father had served into a weapon against her family. That's when Dante spoke, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the entire warehouse. Vincent, he said, and the casual use of the older man's first name made several Torino soldiers shift nervously. You're making a mistake. Am I? You're thinking like it's still 1995, like you can still control information the way you used to. Dante leaned forward slightly, his posture relaxed but his eyes burning with intelligence. But the world's changed. These days, the story isn't just the evidence. It's the cover-up. It's the corruption. It's the old guard trying to bury the truth. Torino frowned. Your point? My point is that if anything happens to Isabella, to her brother, to anyone connected to this folder, you don't just face a corruption scandal. You face a martyrdom narrative. The brave judge's daughter, murdered while exposing the truth. The innocent teenager, destroyed by the system meant to protect him. Dante's smile was sharp as broken glass. That's not news, Vincent. That's legend. That's the kind of story that brings down governments. Isabella watched Torino's face as Dante's words sank in. The older man was seeing the bigger picture now, understanding that in the age of social media and viral outrage, sometimes the cover-up was more dangerous than the crime. Besides, Dante continued conversationally, you're assuming I came here to negotiate. The words sent a chill through the warehouse. Isabella saw Torino's men tense, saw her own life hanging in the balance of whatever game Dante was playing. Then why did you come? Torino asked, his voice carefully controlled. Dante's smile widened, and for the first time since she'd met him, Isabella saw the true predator beneath the sophisticated exterior. To tell you that you have exactly 1 hour to disappear before every federal agency in the country comes down on your organization like the wrath of God. He checked his watch casually. 58 minutes now. Torino went very still. What did you do? What I should have done 2 years ago. Dante's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. I made a deal with the FBI. Full immunity for my organization in exchange for everything we know about yours. Bank records, property holdings, personnel files, operational details, everything. The warehouse erupted in chaos. Torino's men drew weapons, Dante's crew responded in kind, and suddenly Isabella found herself in the center of a Mexican standoff with enough firepower to level a city block. But it was Marco who broke the tension, his young voice cutting through the chaos with Romano determination. Tick-tock, you bastards. How much of that hour do you want to waste pointing guns at each other? The standoff lasted exactly 17 seconds before Vincent Torino made his choice. With a sharp gesture, he signaled his men to lower their weapons. The sound of safeties clicking back on echoed through the warehouse like a collective exhale. Clever, Torino said, his voice carrying grudging respect. Very clever, Salvatore. Using the girl as bait while you arranged your own immunity deal. I underestimated you. Most people do, Dante replied calmly. It's how I've survived this long. Isabella felt a mixture of relief and betrayal washing over her. Relief that the immediate threat had passed, that Marco might actually walk out of this alive. But betrayal because Dante had orchestrated this entire confrontation without telling her, had used her father's evidence and her desperation as cover for his own agenda. Torino stood slowly, straightening his jacket with the dignity of a man who'd lost but wouldn't beg. How long do I have? The federal task force raids your properties at dawn, Dante said. If you're smart, you'll be on a plane to somewhere without extradition treaties long before then. And my organization? We'll survive. Most of your people are small fish. They'll flip, serve minimal time, and be back on the streets in a few years. Dante's expression hardened. But you, Vincent, you're finished. The best you can hope for is a comfortable exile. Isabella watched this exchange with growing unease. Something was wrong with the picture, though she couldn't quite identify what. Torino was taking the news of his destruction too calmly, almost as if he'd expected it. Release the boy, Torino ordered, and his men immediately let go of Marco, who stumbled toward Isabella on unsteady legs. She caught him, holding him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his cheap cologne and teenage defiance. You okay? She whispered. Been better, Marco muttered against her shoulder. But I'm alive, which is more than I expected an hour ago. Touching, Torino said dryly. A real hallmark moment. But before I make my dramatic exit, there's something you should know, Miss Romano. Isabella looked up from her brother's battered face. What? Your boyfriend here didn't just make a deal with the FBI. He made a deal with me, too. The words hit Isabella like ice water. She felt Marco tense against her, felt the careful equilibrium of the warehouse shift once again. What are you talking about? She demanded. Torino's smile was all malice and satisfaction. Ask him about Chicago PD Detective Sarah Chen. Ask him about the surveillance footage from your father's accident. Ask him why the FBI suddenly developed such an interest in my organization after 3 years of looking the other way. Isabella turned to Dante, searching his face for denial, for confusion, for anything that would make Torino's words a lie. Instead, she found guilt written in every line of his expression. Dante, she whispered. What is he talking about? Before he could answer, Tommy stepped forward, his face grim. Boss, we got company. Federal vehicles. Maybe 6 blocks out and closing fast. The warehouse erupted into controlled chaos. Torino's men began filing toward the exits with the practiced efficiency of career criminals who'd rehearsed this moment. But Isabella barely noticed the exodus. Her entire world had narrowed to Dante's face, and the truth she could see swimming in his storm-gray eyes. Tell me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante's hands clenched at his sides. Isabella, I can explain. Tell me. The shout came from somewhere deep in her chest, carrying 3 years of grief and betrayal, and the terrible suspicion that she'd been played by yet another man who claimed to care about her. 6 months ago, Detective Chen approached me with footage from a traffic camera near your father's accident. Dante said, the words coming out in a rush. Clear video of Torino's people tampering with your father's car. She offered me a deal. Help the FBI build a case against Vincent, and they'd grant my organization immunity for past crimes. Isabella felt the world tilting beneath her feet. 6 months ago. You've known about this for 6 months? Yes. And you never thought to tell me, to tell Marco. We had a right to know that there was proof our father was murdered. I was protecting you, Dante said desperately. If Torino had known you were connected to the investigation. So instead, you decided to play God with our lives? Isabella's voice cracked with rage and hurt. You let me fall for you, let me trust you, let me believe that you cared about me for who I was, when all along I was just another piece on your chessboard. No, that's not. Dante stepped toward her, but Isabella backed away, pulling Marco with her. Don't, she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. Don't you dare tell me what it wasn't. You used me. You used my father's memory, my love for my brother, my feelings for you. You used all of it to get what you wanted. What I wanted was justice for your father, Dante said, his own voice rising. What I wanted was to see the man who killed him pay for what he did. What you wanted was immunity from prosecution, Isabella shot back. Everything else was just convenient packaging. The sound of approaching sirens was getting louder, adding urgency to their confrontation. Tommy appeared at Dante's elbow. Boss, we need to go, now. But Isabella wasn't finished. 3 years of suppressed anger and grief were pouring out of her, like poison from a wound. Did you even mean it? She asked, her voice breaking. When you said you loved me? Or was that just part of the act? For a moment, Dante's carefully controlled facade cracked completely. She saw pain in his eyes, real and raw and devastating. "I meant every word," he said quietly. "Isabella, you have to believe me. Everything I felt for you, everything we shared, it was real. The investigation was separate from—" "Nothing was separate," she screamed. "Don't you see that? There was no separation between the case and us, between your deal and my feelings, between your manipulation and my heart. It was all connected, all planned, all calculated." She was crying now, tears of rage and betrayal streaming down her face. Marco's arm tightened around her shoulders, her little brother trying to protect her from a pain he was too young to fully understand. "Bella," Dante said, and his voice carried such longing, such desperate regret, that it almost broke through her anger. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you decided I was useful. How you weighed my value as an asset against whatever feelings you might have developed. How you chose your own survival over honesty." The sirens were almost on top of them now. Federal agents would be swarming the building any minute, and Isabella knew that once they arrived, this conversation would be over. But she wasn't ready to let it end, wasn't ready to let him walk away with comfortable lies about noble intentions. "I trusted you," she said, her voice barely audible over the approaching chaos. "I gave you my heart, and you used it as leverage in a game I didn't even know I was playing." Dante took another step toward her, his hand extended as if he could somehow bridge the chasm that had opened between them. "Isabella, I swear to you, on my brother's grave, that what happened between us was never part of any plan. When I walked into your bookstore that night, I wasn't looking for the judge's daughter. I was looking for shelter from the storm. You gave me that, and so much more. But you never told me the truth. Because I was afraid of losing you," he admitted. "Because I knew that if you learned I'd been investigating your father's death without telling you, you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me now." Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself as the warehouse doors burst open and federal agents flooded in like an avenging tide. In the chaos of shouted commands and flashing badges, she found herself looking into Dante's eyes one last time. "You were right to be afraid," she said softly, "because this is exactly how I'm going to remember you. As the man who saved my brother's life and broke my heart in the same night." Before he could respond, the agents had separated them, professional hands guiding Isabella and Marco towards safety, while others surrounded Dante with the careful respect due an asset who'd delivered a crime boss on a silver platter. As she was led from the warehouse, Isabella looked back once to see Dante standing alone in the center of the chaos, his expression desolate. Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw him mouth 3 words that cut through her anger like a blade. "I'm sorry, Isabella." But sorry wasn't enough to rebuild trust once it had been shattered. Sorry couldn't undo the choices he'd made or the lies he'd told by omission. Sorry couldn't change the fact that the man she'd fallen in love with had built their entire relationship on a foundation of calculated deception. Outside in the cool Chicago night, Isabella held Marco close and tried to figure out how she was supposed to feel grateful for justice while mourning the death of love. 2 weeks had passed since the warehouse confrontation, and Isabella Romano had discovered that justice served cold tasted like ash in her mouth. Vincent Torino was gone, vanished into whatever hole men like him crawled into when their empires crumbled. His organization lay in ruins, key lieutenants either dead or in federal custody, their assets frozen, their power structure dismantled. The newspapers called it the biggest organized crime takedown in Chicago history. Detective Sarah Chen had been promoted to captain. The FBI task force had earned commendations, and Isabella sat in her rebuilt bookstore surrounded by new shelves and fresh paint that couldn't quite mask the smell of betrayal that seemed to cling to everything. "You're brooding again," Sophie Martinez said, setting a cup of coffee on the counter where Isabella sat staring at the morning paper. Sophie had become a regular fixture in the weeks since the raid, a friend from the neighborhood who'd appointed herself Isabella's unofficial therapist and chief distraction provider. "I'm processing," Isabella corrected, though she knew Sophie was right. The article spread before her detailed the final arrests in the Torino case. complete with photos of federal agents hauling away boxes of evidence from various properties around the city. Honey, there's processing and then there's self-torture. Which one involves reading the same paragraph 5 times while your coffee gets cold? Isabella closed the paper with more force than necessary. Fine, I'm brooding. Are you happy? Ecstatic, Sophie said dryly. Now tell me what's really eating at you. Because if this is still about Mr. Tall, Dark, and criminally handsome, we need to have a serious talk about your priorities. Before Isabella could respond, Marco burst through the front door, his school backpack hitting the floor with a thud that rattled the nearest bookshelf. His face carried the flush of teenage excitement mixed with barely controlled anxiety. Bella, we need to talk, he said, glancing meaningfully at Sophie. I can take a hint, Sophie said, gathering her purse. But Isabella, what I said about priorities, think about it. After Sophie left, Marco locked the door and flipped the closed sign, despite the fact that they'd only been open for an hour. What's wrong? Isabella asked, her protective instincts immediately on high alert. Nothing's wrong. That's the problem. Marco pulled out his phone, showing her a news alert. Look at this. Isabella read the headline, her blood slowly turning to ice water. Federal task force disbanded following Torino investigation completion. Keep reading, Marco urged. She scrolled down, her dread growing with each paragraph. The task force that had brought down Torino's organization was being dissolved, its members reassigned to other cases. The evidence collected during the investigation would be archived pending any future court proceedings. I don't understand, Isabella said, though a sick certainty was already forming in her stomach. What does this mean? It means they got what they wanted, Marco said, his 17-year-old voice carrying a cynicism that broke Isabella's heart. Torino's gone, his organization's destroyed, and now they're packing up and moving on to the next case. But that's good, right? Justice was served. The man who killed our father is finished. Marco's laugh was bitter. Is he? Because according to this article, Vincent Torino hasn't actually been arrested. He's just disappeared. No charges filed, no extradition requests, no manhunt. He's gone, and apparently, that's good enough for the FBI. Isabella felt the walls of her carefully rebuilt world starting to crack. What are you saying? I'm saying we were played, Bella. All of us. The FBI wanted Torino's organization destroyed, but they never intended to actually prosecute him. Why risk a trial that might expose their own methods, their deals with people like Dante? Much cleaner to just let him disappear into exile. The phone slipped from Isabella's nerveless fingers, clattering on the counter. She thought about Dante's words in the warehouse, his claim that he'd made a deal with the FBI for justice. But Marco was right. This wasn't justice. This was just political convenience wrapped in the language of law enforcement. There's more, Marco said quietly. I've been doing some research of my own. Marco. No, listen to me. Torino didn't just disappear. He transferred most of his liquid assets to offshore accounts 3 days before the raid. Almost like he knew it was coming. Isabella's knees went weak. She gripped the counter for support as the implications crashed over her. You're saying he was warned? I'm saying a lot of people knew that raid was coming, and Vincent Torino was apparently one of them. Marco's young face was hard with adult understanding. The question is, who told him? Before Isabella could process this latest revelation, the bell above the door chimed. She looked up to see Detective Sarah Chen entering the bookstore, her expression carefully neutral. Ms. Romano, Chen said, her voice carrying the professional courtesy of a cop delivering bad news. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to speak with you about the case. Which case would that be, Detective? Isabella asked, proud that her voice remained steady. The one where you got Vincent Torino exile instead of a prison cell? Chen's expression flickered, a flash of something that might have been guilt. I understand you're disappointed with the outcome. Disappointed. Isabella's composure finally cracked. My father was murdered, Detective. Murdered by a man who's now sipping drinks on some beach instead of rotting in federal prison. So no, disappointed doesn't begin to cover what I'm feeling. Vincent Torino's organization has been completely dismantled, Chen said, her tone becoming defensive. His network is destroyed, his associates are in custody, his ability to hurt anyone else is finished. But he's free. He's neutralized. Sometimes that's the best we can hope for in cases like this. Marco stepped forward, his young face blazing with Romano righteousness. Cases like what? Cases where the victim was a judge who actually believed in the law. Cases where doing the right thing is less convenient than making deals with criminals. Chen's jaw tightened. Mr. Romano, I understand your anger. No, you don't, Marco shot back. Because if you did, Vincent Torino would be in a cell right now, not living in exile on blood money. Isabella watched this exchange with growing unease. There was something in Chen's posture, something in the way she avoided direct eye contact, that suggested Marco's suspicions weren't paranoid teenage fantasies. Detective, Isabella said quietly, who made the decision to let Torino disappear instead of pursuing extradition? That decision came from above my pay grade. Whose pay grade? Chen was quiet for a long moment, her internal struggle visible in the tension around her eyes. Finally, she seemed to reach some kind of resolution. Ms. Romano, I want you to understand something. The investigation into your father's death was real. The evidence we collected was solid. Vincent Torino absolutely ordered that assassination. But prosecuting him would have required revealing sources and methods that certain people consider classified. It would have exposed ongoing operations, compromised assets, possibly gotten people killed. Isabella felt sick. So my father's murder was buried to protect other operations? Your father's murder was avenged, Chen corrected. Torino lost everything. His empire, his power, his ability to hurt anyone else. That has to count for something. It would count for more if he was behind bars. Chen nodded slowly. Yes, it would. After the detective left, Isabella and Marco sat in silence among the books and fresh paint, processing the scope of what they'd learned. Their father's killer was free, protected by the same system Judge Romano had served faithfully for 20 years. The FBI had used their grief and Dante's guilt to destroy a criminal organization, then quietly swept the uncomfortable details under classified rugs. What do we do now? Marco asked finally. Isabella looked around the bookstore that had cost her so much to rebuild, thought about the life she'd been trying to construct from the ashes of her family's destruction. She thought about Dante, wherever he was, and wondered if he'd known how this would end when he made his deal with the federal devil. Now? She said, her voice carrying a new edge of determination. Now we stop letting other people make decisions about our family's justice. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. Who are you calling? Marco asked. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a familiar voice answered, rough with surprise and what might have been hope. Isabella? Dante, she said, her heart hammering against her ribs. We need to talk. They met in Grant Park at midnight, far from the eyes of federal agents and neighborhood gossips. Isabella sat on a bench overlooking the lake, watching the city lights dance on the dark water while she waited for the man who'd broken her heart and saved her brother's life in the same night. Dante appeared from the shadows like a ghost materializing from her memories. He looked different, thinner, more careworn, as if the weight of his choices had finally begun to crush him. When their eyes met, Isabella felt an unwelcome flutter of the old attraction, quickly suppressed by the armor of anger she'd built around her heart. You came, he said, settling onto the far end of the bench, careful to maintain distance between them. Don't mistake this for forgiveness, Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. I called you because I need answers, and you're the only person who might have them. Dante nodded, accepting her terms. What do you want to know? Did you know? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. When you made your deal with the FBI, did you know they had no intention of actually prosecuting Torino? His silence stretched long enough to be an answer in itself. Jesus Christ, Isabella breathed. You knew. I suspected, Dante corrected, his voice hollow. The terms of the immunity deal were too generous. Too comprehensive. The FBI doesn't give away that much unless they're protecting something bigger than just an informant. And you didn't think to mention this when you were declaring your love for me? Dante flinched as if she'd slapped him. What was I supposed to say, Isabella? That I'd made a deal with devils to get devils, and your father's killer might walk free anyway? How do you tell someone that the system they believe in is just as corrupt as the criminals it's supposed to fight? You tell them the truth! Isabella's voice cracked with suppressed fury. You give them the choice to decide for themselves instead of playing God with their emotions. And if I'd told you the truth? If I'd said that bringing down Torino's organization might be the best justice we could get, would you have helped? Would you have let me get close enough to matter to you? Isabella wanted to say yes, wanted to claim that she would have chosen him regardless. But sitting here in the cold Chicago night, staring at the man who'd manipulated her heart with surgical precision, she couldn't summon that particular lie. That wasn't your choice to make, she said finally. No, Dante agreed quietly. It wasn't, and I've paid for it every day since. They sat in silence, two broken people trying to navigate the wreckage of trust and desire. Finally, Isabella found the strength to ask the question that had brought her here. Who warned him, Dante? Who told Torino the raid was coming? Dante's expression darkened. You know about that? Marco figured it out. Asset transfers 3 days before the raid. All the liquid cash moved offshore. Someone with access to classified information tipped him off. I've been trying to figure that out myself, Dante admitted. The list of people who knew the timing was small. FBI task force members, a few Justice Department officials, maybe some local law enforcement liaisons. Detective Chen? Possible, but unlikely. She's career law enforcement, straight arrow. She really believed in the case. Isabella pulled her coat tighter against the lake breeze, thinking, what about your people? Anyone in your organization who might have been playing both sides? Dante's jaw tightened. That occurred to me. But everyone who knew about my FBI cooperation is either dead or locked up with the rest of Torino's people. Everyone? Everyone except... Dante stopped, his expression shifting as a terrible realization dawned. Tommy. Your lieutenant. He knew about the deal. He helped arrange the meetings, handled the logistics. Dante was on his feet now, pacing with predatory energy. But Tommy's been with my family for 15 years. He served my father before me. Which means he knew both organizations intimately, Isabella pointed out. Their procedures, their weaknesses, their personnel. It also means he had access to Torino's people through old connections. Dante's voice carried the cold fury of a man discovering betrayal from within his own ranks. Son of a bitch, he played us all. Where is he now? Good question. Dante pulled out his phone, speed dialing a number. Marco, it's Dante. I need you to check on Tommy Benedetti's current location. He paused, listening. What do you mean he's not answering? Since when? Another pause. Find him. Now. Isabella watched this transformation with a mixture of fascination and dread. The gentleman who'd confessed his love in her bookstore was gone, replaced by the dangerous leader of a criminal organization. And despite everything he'd done to her, despite the lies and manipulation, she found herself grateful that this deadly version of Dante Salvatore was on her side. Tommy's gone, Dante said, ending the call. Hasn't been seen since yesterday. His apartment's cleaned out, his car's missing, even his bank accounts have been emptied. So he warned Torino and then ran. Looks like it. Dante's expression was granite hard in the moonlight. Which means Vincent Torino is sitting somewhere safe with a fortune in stolen money and detailed knowledge of every federal operation that brought down his organization. Isabella felt sick. He could rebuild, start over somewhere else. Worse than that, Dante said grimly. He's got enough information to expose every informant, every asset, every federal operation that was connected to the task force. People are going to die because of Tommy's betrayal. The scope of the disaster was staggering. Isabella thought about Detective Chen, about the FBI agents who'd risked their careers to build the case, about all the people whose lives were now in jeopardy because one man had chosen money over loyalty. There has to be something we can do, she said. Dante looked at her with something that might have been hope. We? Isabella met his gaze directly. Vincent Torino killed my father and got away with it because the system failed. Tommy Benedetti helped him escape justice and endangered innocent lives in the process. Yes, we. This isn't about forgiveness, Dante. This is about finishing what we started. Isabella, if we go after them, there's no federal backup, no immunity deals, no safety net. We'd be on our own against people who've already proven they're willing to kill anyone who gets in their way. Then we better not get in their way, Isabella said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. We better get ahead of them. Dante studied her face in the pale light, and she saw the exact moment when he recognized something in her expression that reminded him of her father. The same unflinching determination that had gotten Judge Romano killed was now burning in his daughter's eyes. What did you have in mind? He asked quietly. Isabella pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Detective Chen said prosecuting Torino would require revealing sources and methods that were classified. But what if those sources and methods were revealed anyway? What if someone leaked the information that would force the Justice Department to act? You're talking about whistleblowing on a massive scale. I'm talking about transparency, Isabella corrected. About forcing the system to live up to its own standards instead of hiding behind national security classifications. She hit dial, listening to the phone ring while Dante watched her with a mixture of admiration and terror. Isabella? Detective Chen's voice was groggy with sleep and confusion. It's almost 1 a.m. What's wrong? Detective, I need you to listen very carefully, Isabella said, her voice carrying her father's judicial authority. Vincent Torino was warned about the federal raid. Someone with access to classified information helped him escape. And unless we act fast, a lot of good people are going to die to cover up that betrayal. There was a long pause. Then Chen's voice, suddenly sharp and professional. Where are you? Grant Park, with Dante Salvatore. Another pause, longer this time. Stay exactly where you are. I'm on my way. After Isabella ended the call, Dante shook his head in amazement. You realize what you just did? You just declared war on everyone who benefited from letting Torino escape. Isabella looked out over the dark lake, thinking about her father's belief in justice, about the bookstore that had been destroyed and rebuilt, about the choice between safety and truth that had defined her entire family. Good, she said simply. It's about time someone did. Detective Sarah Chen arrived at Grant Park with backup that made Isabella's heart race. 4 unmarked cars, a tactical van, and enough federal agents to siege a small country. As they surrounded the bench where she and Dante waited, Isabella realized she'd miscalculated the scope of what she was unleashing. Ms. Romano, Chen said, approaching with her weapon holstered but her hand resting on the grip. Mr. Salvatore, thank you for calling this in. Are we under arrest? Isabella asked, noting how the agents had positioned themselves to cut off any escape routes. That depends, Chen replied, her expression unreadable in the park's dim lighting. On whether you're willing to help us fix the mess that Tommy Benedetti created. Dante straightened, his posture shifting to the dangerous alertness Isabella had come to recognize. What kind of help? The kind that gets Vincent Torino back on American soil so he can face trial for Judge Romano's murder, Chen said, and the kind that stops him from selling federal intelligence to every terrorist organization with a checkbook. The words hit Isabella like ice water. What are you talking about? Chen gestured to one of the agents, who approached carrying a tablet computer. The screen showed a fuzzy surveillance photo of Vincent Torino sitting at what appeared to be a cafe table, across from 2 men in expensive suits. This was taken yesterday in Monaco, Chen explained. Our sources identify the men with Torino as representatives from a Syrian arms trafficking ring. The preliminary intelligence suggests he's auctioning off everything he knows about federal operations. Isabella felt sick. How much does he know? Enough to get dozens of undercover agents killed, Chen said grimly. Enough to compromise operations across 3 continents. Enough to set back organized crime investigations by a decade. So arrest him, Dante said flatly. Monaco has extradition treaties. Monaco also has very specific requirements about evidence and probable cause, Chen replied. Requirements that we can't meet without revealing sources and methods that would compromise other operations. It's a catch-22. Isabella began to understand the scope of what Chen was asking. You need him to come back voluntarily, or we need him to commit a crime on American soil that would justify extraordinary measures. Chen's expression was carefully neutral, but her meaning was clear. You want to set a trap, Dante said. We want to give him a reason to return, something valuable enough to risk coming back for. Chen looked directly at Isabella. Something like unfinished business. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Isabella felt Dante tense beside her, his protective instincts warring with practical necessities. You want to use me as bait? Isabella said, her voice steadier than she felt. We want to offer Mr. Torino something he can't resist, Chen corrected. The chance to eliminate the one person who could still testify about his involvement in Judge Romano's murder. That's insane, Dante said, his voice carrying lethal calm. You're talking about putting Isabella directly in the path of a man who's already killed her father and tried to kill her brother. We're talking about giving her the chance to finish what her father started, Chen countered. To bring Vincent Torino to justice not as a victim, but as the architect of his downfall. Isabella looked between them, these two people who claimed to want to protect her while simultaneously asking her to walk into mortal danger. But buried beneath her fear, she felt something else stirring. The same burning need for justice that had driven her father to keep digging even when powerful people warned him to stop. How would it work? She asked. Isabella, no, Dante said immediately. Whatever they're planning, it's too dangerous. Let her hear it, Chen said. Then she can make her own choice. The detective activated the tablet, showing Isabella a series of documents and photographs. We leak information suggesting you've come into possession of additional evidence about your father's murder, something that directly connects Torino to the assassination. Financial records, maybe, or communications between Torino and the actual killers. Evidence that doesn't exist, Isabella pointed out. Evidence that Torino doesn't know doesn't exist, Chen corrected. He's been out of the country, cut off from his usual intelligence sources.
If we plant the story correctly, make it look like you're preparing to testify in a sealed federal proceeding, he'll have no choice but to eliminate you before the trial. And when he comes for me, we'll be ready, Chen promised. Full surveillance, tactical support, multiple layers of protection. You'll never be in real danger. Dante laughed, the sound harsh and disbelieving.
You'll never be in real danger? Detective, with all due respect, you people couldn't protect a federal courthouse from one old man with a grudge. What makes you think you can protect Isabella from Vincent Torino? Because this time we'll know he's coming, Chen said. This time, we control the battlefield. Isabella stared at the surveillance photo of Torino, remembering the elegant man who'd sat across from her in the warehouse, casual in his cruelty, comfortable in his power. The man who'd killed her father and walked away free while good people died to cover up his escape. What happens if we don't do this? She asked. Chen's expression darkened. Best case scenario? Torino sells enough intelligence to get a few dozen federal agents killed, then disappears forever into some non-extradition country. Worst case? The information he's selling ends up in the hands of people who use it to plan attacks on American soil. And my father's murder? Goes unpunished. Forever. The words hit Isabella like physical blows. She thought about Judge Anthony Romano, about his belief in justice, about the files he'd kept hidden in the bookstore basement, evidence of crimes that powerful people wanted to bury. He died because he refused to look the other way when evil wore expensive suits and hid behind legitimate businesses. I'll do it, she said quietly. Isabella, Dante started. I'll do it, she repeated, her voice gaining strength. But I have conditions. Chen nodded. Name them. First, my brother stays completely out of this. He goes into protective custody until it's over. Somewhere Torino can't possibly reach him. Agreed. Second, Mr. Salvatore here provides additional security. Your people watch from a distance, but he's my immediate protection. Dante's eyes widened. Isabella, I can't ask you to trust me with your life. Not after everything. You're not asking. Isabella interrupted. I'm telling. You want a chance to prove that your feelings for me were real? This is it. Chen looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with the personal dynamics at play. Ms. Romano, I'm not sure involving a civilian, especially one with Mr. Salvatore's background, is wise. Then find another way to catch Torino, Isabella said simply. Because those are my terms. Take them or leave them. There was a long silence while Chen consulted quietly with her fellow agents. Finally, she returned to the bench. We'll make it work, she said. But Mr. Salvatore, you'll be operating under federal supervision. Any deviation from the plan, any action that puts Ms. Romano at additional risk, and we pull you out immediately. Dante nodded grimly. Understood. As the federal agents began packing up their equipment, preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most complex operation any of them had ever attempted, Isabella found herself alone with Dante for a moment. Why? He asked quietly. Why trust me to protect you after everything I've done? Isabella looked out over the dark lake, thinking about trust and betrayal, about love and justice, about the choice between safety and truth that seemed to define her entire family. Because, she said finally, if I'm going to die trying to finish my father's work, I want to die knowing that the man I love was willing to die trying to save me. Dante's breath caught. Isabella. I still love you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I hate that I love you. Hate that you manipulated me. Hate that I can't seem to stop caring about you despite everything. But that's the truth. And if we're walking into hell together, we might as well be honest about it. Before he could respond, Chen's voice cut through the night air. People, we need to move. We've got 72 hours to set this trap before Torino's intelligence auction goes live. After that, stopping him becomes someone else's problem. As they walked back toward the cars, Isabella felt Dante's hand brush against hers, not holding, not claiming, just touching. A reminder that whatever happened in the next 3 days, she wouldn't face it alone, even if it killed them both. The trap was set with the precision of a Swiss watch and the delicacy of a house of cards. For 72 hours, Isabella Romano became the most protected civilian in Chicago, surrounded by layers of federal surveillance so sophisticated that she couldn't buy coffee without 3 different agencies knowing about it. The bait was elegant in its simplicity. Leaked documents suggesting Isabella had discovered her father's hidden safe deposit box, containing financial records that directly linked Vincent Torino to Judge Romano's assassination. The story spread through underground channels like wildfire, carefully crafted to reach Torino's remaining contacts while appearing authentic enough to demand his personal attention. Isabella waited in her bookstore, surrounded by the familiar smell of paper and ink, trying to read the same page of To Kill a Mockingbird for the 100th time. Dante sat across from her, cleaning a pistol with the methodical care of a man who understood that details saved lives. Neither of them spoke much. There wasn't much left to say. On the 3rd night, Vincent Torino came for her. He didn't arrive with an army or a dramatic entrance. Instead, he walked through the front door at closing time like any other customer, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate despite the October chill. Only the gun in his hand distinguished him from the dozens of book browsers who'd visited that day. Ms. Romano, he said pleasantly, as if they were meeting for tea instead of murder. You've been causing me considerable inconvenience. Isabella set down her book with hands that trembled only slightly. Mr. Torino, I was wondering when you'd show up. Were you? He glanced around the rebuilt bookstore, taking note of the security cameras, the reinforced windows, the carefully positioned mirrors that eliminated blind spots. How thorough. Your federal friends have been busy. Where are they? Dante asked quietly, not moving from his chair but somehow radiating dangerous potential energy. Indisposed, Torino replied casually. Amazing how a few well-placed explosions can redirect law enforcement attention. By the time they realize the warehouse fires were diversions, this conversation will be long over. Isabella's blood chilled. The federal agents watching from outside, the tactical teams positioned around the building, the entire carefully orchestrated protection network. All of it had been anticipated and neutralized by a man who'd survived decades in a world where paranoia was a survival skill. "Tommy told you about the surveillance plan," Dante said, pieces falling into place. "Tommy told me about a great many things before I killed him," Torino confirmed, "including Mr. Salvatore's touching devotion to playing the hero for a woman who will never forgive him. The casual mention of murder, delivered in the same tone as a weather report, made Isabella's stomach lurch. But beneath the fear, she felt something else stirring. The same cold determination that had driven her father to keep investigating even when powerful people warned him to stop. "You killed him because he knew too much," she said. "I killed him because he served his purpose," Torino corrected. "Just as you're about to serve yours, my dear. Your death will send a very clear message to anyone else who thinks they can interfere with my business." "What business?" Isabella asked, standing slowly. "Your organization is destroyed, your assets frozen, your people dead or in prison. What exactly are you protecting anymore?" Torino's smile was all predator. "Knowledge, Ms. Romano. Information. The kind of intelligence that governments will pay millions to acquire and billions to suppress. Your father's investigation was just the beginning. Thanks to Tommy's access to federal operations, I now possess enough classified information to topple administrations. And you're planning to sell it to the highest bidder. I'm planning to retire in luxury, yes. But first, I need to eliminate the loose ends that might complicate those plans." His gun shifted slightly, centering on Isabella's chest. "You and your boyfriend here represent unacceptable risks to my future prosperity." Dante moved then, a blur of controlled violence that spoke to years of surviving in a world where hesitation meant death, but Torino had been expecting it. The older man pivoted with surprising grace, his weapon tracking Dante's motion. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the confined space of the bookstore. Isabella screamed as Dante stumbled, blood spreading across his white shirt, his own weapon clattering across the floor. He collapsed against a bookshelf, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but his eyes never left hers. "Touching," Torino observed, "but ultimately futile." Isabella knelt beside Dante, pressing her hands against the spreading stain on his shirt. The wound was high on his chest, close to his shoulder, but bleeding heavily. His face was pale, but his eyes remained focused, alert. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I promised to protect you." "You did protect me," Isabella replied, tears streaming down her face. "You've been protecting me since the day we met." "How romantic," Torino said dryly. "But I'm afraid this story doesn't have a happy ending." He raised his gun again, and Isabella closed her eyes, thinking about her father, about Marco safe in federal custody, about the love she'd found and lost and found again in the span of a few impossible weeks. The gunshot came, but not from Torino's weapon. Isabella opened her eyes to see Detective Sarah Chen standing in the bookstore's rear entrance, her service weapon smoking, her face grim with professional satisfaction. Torino lay crumpled on the floor, his expensive suit now stained with his own blood, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. "Federal agents don't abandon their assets," Chen said, lowering her weapon. "We just get creative about our positioning." Isabella looked up at the detective with a mixture of relief and confusion. "But the explosions, the diversions, were anticipated," Chen confirmed. "Vincent Torino was predictable in his paranoia. He assumed we'd position our people where he could see them, so he created distractions to draw them away. What he didn't expect was that we'd already moved our primary protection inside the building." "You were here the whole time?" "In the basement, listening to every word through the surveillance equipment your father installed when he was conducting his investigation." Chen holstered her weapon and knelt beside Dante, checking his pulse and examining his wound. "He'll live, but he needs a hospital." As paramedics flooded into the bookstore, as federal agents secured the scene and collected evidence, Isabella found herself holding Dante's hand while he was loaded onto a gurney. "Isabella," he said, his voice stronger now despite the blood loss. "Save your strength," she replied. "No, I need to say this." His grip on her hand tightened. "I love you, not as part of some plan, not as a way to use you. I love you because you see light in places where other people only see darkness. Because you chose justice over safety, truth over comfort. Because you're everything good I thought I'd lost the right to want. Isabella leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. Then get better, you idiot. Because I love you too, and I'm tired of almost losing you. 6 months later, Isabella Romano Salvatore stood in the same bookstore, but everything was different. The space had been expanded, incorporating the adjacent building to create a community center that housed not just books, but after-school programs, legal aid clinics, and support groups for families affected by violence. Dante, his arm still weak from the shoulder wound but his smile as devastating as ever, approached carrying 2 cups of coffee and a newspaper. Good news, he said, setting the coffee beside her. The last of Torino's associates was sentenced this morning. 25 years, no possibility of parole. Isabella accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the familiar aroma that still reminded her of late nights and impossible choices. And the intelligence he was trying to sell? Recovered and classified. According to Detective Chen, it prevented at least 3 major security breaches and saved an estimated 40 lives. Isabella nodded, satisfied. Justice had been served, not perfectly, but thoroughly. Vincent Torino was dead, his organization dismantled, his secrets turned against the very criminals who might have bought them. Any word from Marco? Dante asked, settling into the chair beside her. He called this morning. Dean's List again, and he's thinking about law school. Isabella smiled, thinking about her brother, safe at Northwestern University, pursuing the kind of education their father had always dreamed of. Apparently our family has a talent for fighting corruption. Who knew? Your father knew, Dante said softly. He raised you both to believe that justice was worth any sacrifice. Isabella looked around the community center, at the children reading in the corner, at the woman getting legal advice about her abusive husband, at the former gang members attending their weekly support group meeting. This was her father's real legacy, not just the bookstore, but the belief that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they chose courage over comfort. No regrets? Dante asked, following her gaze. Isabella considered the question. She thought about the quiet life she might have had, the simple pleasures of selling books and avoiding complications. She thought about the fear, the danger, the heartbreak that had brought her to this moment. Then she looked at Dante, at the man who'd risked everything to protect her, who'd chosen love over loyalty to his criminal heritage, who'd transformed his family's empire into legitimate businesses that employed hundreds of former criminals looking for second chances. No regrets, she said firmly. Just gratitude that I was brave enough to open the door when a stranger knocked. Dante smiled, that slow, devastating expression that had captured her heart in a moment of kindness and never let go. Ready for the next chapter? He asked, gesturing toward the children's reading circle forming in the corner. Always, Isabella replied, leaning over to kiss him as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the bookstore that had become their sanctuary for the rest of our lives. Outside, Chicago bustled with life, unaware that 2 people had found forever in the space between fear and hope, between justice and mercy, between the darkness that threatened to consume everything and the light that refused to be extinguished. If you enjoy stories like this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. That's how I'll know you truly liked it. Even if you're watching on your TV, grab a second to join this family of fans who love emotional and heartfelt stories. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring you even more tales like this one.